Hello everyone and welcome back to the Northumbrian podcast. Today I will be talking about my recent trip to Kraków in Poland. Now Kraków, some people pronounce it Krakow, but I googled it and Kraków is the nearest approximation I can give to the Polish dude in the audio clip. Kraków is the second largest city in Poland and one of the oldest. In fact, it used to be the capital of Poland until around about the 16th century. We flew direct from Newcastle Airport, which took around 2.5 hours. We stayed in a hotel called the Hotel Wyspiański. Excuse my pronunciation, and throughout the video, please excuse my pronunciation of all the Polish names and words. Now, the Hotel Wyspiański was apparently named after the poet Stanisław Wyspiański, who had an interesting life and an interesting death, actually. I won't say how in the video in case I get demonetized, but feel free to Google it. First person to answer in the comments gets a prize. It was actually a very nice hotel, very modern, clean. The room was comfortable with all the basic amenities that I needed. The breakfast buffet was well stocked with continental breakfast items, so cold meats, eggs, bread, fruit, that type of thing. Talking about breakfast, when we were walking around the main market square one day, a British woman approached us and, realising that we were Brits, asked if we knew anywhere that did an English breakfast. I felt like saying, yeah, Benidorm. Don't get me wrong, I like a full English as much as the next person, but I feel like if you go to visit a historical city in Central Europe, then you should sample the local cuisine, which of course I did. I tried pierogi, which were a kind of potato dumpling. I think you can have a variety of fillings. Żurek soup, which is made with fermented wheat flour. Grilled sheep's cheese with beetroot and onions, and also this street food which I forgot the name of, but was basically grilled Zakopane cheese wrapped in bacon dipped in cranberry sauce. Very tasty. Kraków has this reputation for being really cheap and affordable. It is, but not as much as it used to be, apparently. Just an example, in one restaurant I had 3 courses, starter, main and dessert, and it worked out about 85 zloty. It's spelled zloty, but apparently pronounced złote, which is the Polish currency. This is around £16 English money, so not bad, but not as cheap as it was years ago, apparently. My friend went to Kraków back in 2012, and he paid the equivalent of £10 for 3 courses. But I wasn't particularly bothered about the price. I was there to sample authentic Polish cuisine and experience the local culture. But if you are interested, I did make a brief note of some prices. In one restaurant, a large bottle of beer was 14 zloty, which is around £2.60 English money or $3.30 American. It was the exact same price for a glass of wine. But that particular restaurant was about 10 minutes walk away from the very touristy main square, the Rynek Główny in Polish. So you would expect to pay more if you wanted to dine in the main square itself. A big bottle of sparkling water in that same restaurant was around 15 zloty, so 1 zloty more expensive than the beer, which says a lot about Poland. A big dish of, this is another restaurant we went to, a big dish of pierogi was 29 zloty, which is around £5.50 or $7 American. And believe me, that dish would be sufficient on its own. It was very hearty and filling, at least for me. So my advice, if you're in Kraków and you're looking for somewhere to eat that is affordable and authentically Polish, then maybe avoid the main square and have a little wander down one of the charming side streets, of which there are many. That particular restaurant that we went to was called Piwnica pod Kominkiem. Excuse my pronunciation again, which according to Google Translate means cellar under the fireplace, which it was all underground in the cellar. I think that restaurant deserved a shout out because the food was so nice and the service was very friendly and very attentive. So the sights. The first site that we visited in Krakow was the imposing Wawel Castle, an enormous Gothic 13th century castle that stands atop a high hill overlooking the city. It's been described as one of the most important cultural sites in Poland. It was the royal residence of the Polish kings for centuries and was basically impregnable. After walking all the way up Wawel Hill to the entrance, I could see why it was impregnable. It must have been an insurmountable task to try and besiege Wawel Castle. So if tourists want to explore inside the castle, they actually need to book a ticket at the visitor centre. One thing that we didn't anticipate was you have to pay separately for each part of the castle and book a time slot to see that part of the castle. So you can't just pay one general entrance fee and wander around unsupervised. You have to commit to seeing one part of the castle at a time. I chose the armory and I was not disappointed. The ticket was 20 zloty, which is just under £4 English or just under $5 American. There was an extensive display of swords, crossbows, guns, cannons. So if you love militaria, I would recommend the armory at Wawel Castle. Oddly enough, some of the weapons weren't even secured behind glass. Like any tourist could just pick up one of the enormous medieval swords and just start swinging it around. Although there were some museum staff kind of sitting around in the armory, keeping an eye out. Possibly the easiest job in the world, just making sure tourists don't touch the exhibits. Where can I apply for that job? Krakow is full of religious sites, particularly churches and synagogues. We visited the magnificent St. Mary's Basilica in the main market square, a 13th century example of Gothic architecture. It stands at a dizzying 260 feet high. The ornate altarpiece at the front of the church with monumental polychrome murals, and of course the altar cross itself was visually stunning. On every hour of every day, 365 days a year, a trumpeter plays a trumpet call which ends midstream deliberately to commemorate a 13th century soldier who was shot in the throat while sounding the alarm before a Mongol attack. So they commemorate that every day. We also visited two synagogues in the Jewish quarter, which is an area of town known as the Kazimierz. The Kazimierz feels like a separate town in itself, a completely different vibe from the rest of Krakow, because essentially for much of its history, the Jewish district was treated as a separate town. It was a Jewish enclave surrounded by Christian Poland. Nevertheless, for much of its history, the Jewish community coexisted alongside the Christian Poles until, as we all know, the horrors of German occupation threatened the very existence of the Jewish people in Poland. Thankfully, today, the Jewish community not only remains in Kazimierz, but they are actively working to rebuild a Jewish future in Krakow. We visited two synagogues. One was Reform, I believe, and the other was Orthodox. To obtain entry, the synagogue does request a small donation of 10 zloty, which is just under £2 or $2.50. And I should have mentioned the St. Mary's Basilica was the same. You did pay an entrance donation of 10 zloty. There are a number of Jewish restaurants in Kazimierz where you can sample authentic Jewish cuisine. At one restaurant, a waiter actually came outside trying to kind of PR and convince us to eat there. Anyone who travels is used to PRs outside of restaurants and bars, trying to kind of convince tourists to eat there, which is the norm in tourist resorts like Spain and Greece. But I didn't expect a PR to pop out of a restaurant in the Jewish quarter of Krakow saying, "Steven Spielberg ate here while he was filming Schindler's List. Happy hour until 7. Come and try the kosher wine." That made me smile. But yes, the Jewish district, incredible historical buildings and artifacts you can see there. It is highly recommended that anyone spending time in Krakow should visit the museum at Auschwitz-Birkenau. We booked a trip there through our hotel. We were picked up in a minibus and the journey took around 45 minutes. The drive there gave us an opportunity to see some of rural Poland. Sometimes on these city breaks, you don't really get the chance to see what the surrounding countryside and the hinterland is like, so it was an opportunity to see the gently rolling fields and forests around Krakow. The minibus parked about a quarter of a mile from Auschwitz in a hotel car park. We had to walk about a quarter of a mile to get to the Auschwitz camp itself. It was a spring day, birds were singing, bees were buzzing, but as soon as we got inside the perimeter of Auschwitz itself, the birds stopped singing, nature fell silent, and there was an indescribable heaviness to the atmosphere. It was very strange. So to gain entry to Auschwitz, visitors have to pass through metal detectors and security for reasons which you might imagine. But once inside, we were introduced to our tour guide and we were given headsets to hear her commentary. It is mandatory for visitors to the camp to be accompanied by a tour guide. You can't just wander off on your own. So it really is necessary to have a qualified expert there to give context to all the exhibits that you see. Photography is permitted in most of the museum, but not really encouraged. The exhibits start with some information boards, just outlining the history of fascism, the beginnings of the Holocaust. But then the exhibits get progressively more shocking. We moved on to see official photographs of actual inmates, the photographs taken by the guards of the inmates as they were processed into the camp. The photographs of very high quality, apart from being in black and white, they could have been taken yesterday, which is very uncanny. The photographs start with the adult males and then move on to the women, then the children, which is, it is very disturbing to see. Then we moved on to an exhibit displaying the actual suitcases carried by the inmates with their names on, their surnames, that they assumed they were just being transited somewhere else. The shoes of the inmates, and then finally a viscerally gruesome pile of actual human hair shaved from the heads of the inmates. You are not permitted to take photographs in that particular exhibit. So then we also moved to Birkenau, which is a little distance away. We got a little minibus, shuttle bus to Birkenau, and you see the accommodation where the inmates were kept. They used the absolutely squalid accommodation, and that's where the famous gate is that you often see in pictures of Auschwitz-Birkenau, with the train tracks leading up to it. So all in all, a very solemn journey into humanity's darkest hour. But I feel like everyone should try and visit at least once in their life. There were lots of other trips you could go on around Krakow, like the salt mines, which looked really interesting, but we just didn't have time on our itinerary to see everything. One of the main appeals for tourists in Krakow is the architecture in general. The whole city just has that sort of quaint Central European feel. The roads in Krakow are very orderly. Now, whenever I visit a country, I make a note of what the drivers are like. And I can say that the Krakowians are excellent drivers, always courteous in giving way to pedestrians at the crossings. I make a note of this because I've been to places like in the Mediterranean where the driving is just insane. Now, you might think, well, of course, drivers are supposed to give way to pedestrians at the crossings, but try visiting Athens in Greece and see what happens there if you step out into the road. The one exception to my glowing review of Polish driving is the trams. There are lots of trams in Krakow, and the trams there seem to be a law unto themselves. They don't stop at pedestrian crossings, so if you find yourself in the path of a tram in Krakow, do not expect it to stop for you. Just a word of warning there. The people. Now, whenever a friend or colleague returns from a a trip abroad, I always ask them, what were the people like? Now this question seems odd and it sometimes confounds people who are either indifferent or unobservant about other people, but I like to know what the people are like whenever I visit somewhere. The young Polish people working in customer services tended to be very courteous, very friendly, and spoke excellent English. Some young Polish people speak better English than actual English people that I know. Whereas older Poles who maybe grew up before 1989, maybe the level of English is a bit less because quite simply they weren't taught English in the school before 1989 for obvious reasons. Some of them were a bit less smiley, and some of them had an almost surly dignity about them, which I really respect. I genuinely do respect that, because they were raised to believe in the dignity and power of working class people. So, respect to them for maintaining their intrinsic dignity in the face of what you might call an Americanized customer service culture. But yeah, most of the young servers there were just perfectly polite, courteous and friendly. Can't fault them at all. I found that one thing that made a difference in how I was treated as a customer was just trying a little bit of Polish. I think I learned maybe 5 words in Polish, but I feel that it made the world of difference when I entered a shop or restaurant and said dzień dobry, proszę, dziękuję. Just little sayings like that. Hello, please, thank you. I could see their demeanour change when they saw this Brit tourist attempting just to use a few words of their language. The few times where, for example, I just didn't bother with any words of Polish, they were still helpful, but I felt there was a difference in their general demeanour compared to when I actually tried a few words of Polski. I've heard that Polish is apparently one of the hardest European languages for English speakers to learn. And the advice is basically don't bother. It's so complex, even Polish people themselves make linguistic mistakes. But you don't really need to speak Polish anyway, because, as I said, most people under 40 speak very good English, especially in Krakow, because Krakow is a university city full of educated young people, some of whom work in customer service. Krakow has gained something of a reputation for being a destination for booze-loving Brits, but in all honesty, I didn't really see any rowdy English people. There was a Brit bar in the main market square, but needless to say, we judiciously avoided it. Although if a tourist really has their heart set on getting drunk in Krakow, of course there are plenty of taverns and bars. And of course, Polish beer is of very high quality, arguably some of the best in Europe, and is often cheaper than bottled water, as I found. So in summary, I would highly recommend Krakow to anyone if you are looking for a city break somewhere cultured and civilized in the heart of Europe. So thank you very much for watching. On this podcast, I talk about everything and nothing else, so my next video might be something entirely different. So feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.